Money is nothing more than a social construct. And as such, it's a man-made system, and I stress man-made here. And because it's man-made, we can change it, we can transform it. Now, it's hard to transform something we can't see, but we can try and understand this man-made system. I have spent a lot of time in poor countries, in low-income countries in Africa, where they do not have a monetary system. They don't have a proper banking system. They don't have a central bank that they trust. They don't have criminal justice systems and judicial systems that uphold contracts. And they don't have regulated accounting systems. And as a result, they have no money. If they had their own monetary system, and if it was upheld by the institutions that uphold our monetary system, they wouldn't have to rely on the greenback, on the dollar. And that's how wonderful a monetary system is. It facilitates economic activity, and economic activity means employment, and employment means income. So it's a really incredible institution. It's an incredible thing that we've invented. But of course, we invented it way back. The Florentines were the first to come up with the basics of the system, and then the Dutch learned how to manage it. So in the old days, before there was a monetary system, bad guys, the robber barons, would go around raping and pillaging and building up a surplus of something or other, corn, gold, or whatever you want. And they'd have that surplus in the vaults of their castles. And if a young farmer, an entrepreneur, wanted to do something, they'd have to go to the top of the castle and beg the lord of the manor for some money in order to expand the plot of land or whatever the work was that entrepreneur was trying to do. And the lord of the manor, the robber baron, would say, yeah, of course you can have some of my savings, but I'm going to charge you very high rent for the privilege of borrowing my savings. And by the way, I see you've got a beautiful daughter. Would you bring her up to the castle sometime, right? So that's how the system worked before we had a monetary system. And when the Dutch and the Florentines invented this system, you could go to the bank and ask for a loan and not be subject to, first, the very high rates of interest charged by the robber barons, and secondly, to kind of scrutiny of your personal life. What really mattered if you went to see the bank was whether or not you had a viable project and whether or not you could be trusted. If your name was Robert Stevenson and you were thinking up a steam engine, you could go to the bank and say, look, I've got this big idea. It's risky because there ain't no railway lines for the steam engine yet, and I'm going to need for that infrastructure to be built, but there's this great idea I've got. Now, it's really fascinating that the Industrial Revolution kind of correlates with the establishment of a monetary system and the banking system. It is the reason why we had an Industrial Revolution. It was why Robert Stevenson could get financing for his very, very risky venture, right? But it evolves in the first instance on the basis of trust. Credo, credit means I believe. I believe that you will pay me for this thing at some point in the future. I believe that you're reliable. If I'm not sure that you're reliable, if I think you're a risky bet, I'm going to charge you quite a high rate of interest. But if I trust you, I probably, and your risk level is low, I'm going to probably charge a very low rate of interest. And so what the monetary system is simply a system, as Joseph Schumpeter superbly argued, money is a promise to pay. That's all it is. We've had credit or money systems for 5,000 years. They weren't as sophisticated, perhaps, as the Florentines and the Dutch, but they were based on this thing called trust. So if you imagine a little village, I would be the hairdresser in the village, and I could cut hair, and my neighbor would be a thatcher, and I would say, I'll cut your hair if you'll thatch my roof. The question would become, yeah, I cut his hair, but will he thatch my roof? Will he just say, sorry, yeah, thanks very much for cutting my hair, and walk away? No. So what we arrange is a promise to pay. And what's absolutely critical in that village is that there's a third party, and it's the chief or it's the priest. It's someone that everybody trusts, and they uphold that promise. And this is the way in which monetary systems evolved in the first instance. And of course, it's based, the priest or the chief of the village was also responsible for checking whether or not a pint of beer was a pint of beer. or a yard of cloth was a yard of cloth. So we've always had these standard holders, these standard bearers, these upholders, these regulators of the system. And the magic of the promise to pay is that it facilitates transaction. It gives me work, it gives you work, and I can then build up in my cottage in the village a little promise, a little pot of promises. I've cut a lot of people's hair, and what I generate thereby some savings. Now imagine in that village, there's a bunch of hooligans, young lads, you know, they're probably sort of 16, 18 years old, and they like gambling in the village square. They're a bit of a problem because they gamble, tensions rise, they get aggressive, they get bad with each other. One of the little young men goes to his mum's place, she's the hairdresser, and loots her pot of promises and says, "Don't worry, Mum, I'm going to gamble it in the village square, but I'm going to be able to come back and give you more." And she lets him do it, and he gambles away all her accumulated savings. Right? So that's the way our monetary system works today, except that now the young men in the square are in charge of the system. They've looted our pension pots, they've looted an awful lot of our assets, and they're out there in the stratosphere beyond the reach of the village chief, and they're gambling with our money.